Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new pair of Ace in the Day gameplays for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we'll be reviewing the Ki-27 Otsu, a Japanese fighter aircraft coming to tier of 1 and a battle rating of 1.3. To provide you with a historical overview as to the Ki-27 in general and this particular sub-variant, we begin thus. When a competition was held by the Imperial Japanese Army in June of 1935 for the companies Nakajima, Mitsubishi and Kawasaki to all submit low-wing monoplane designs to replace the Kawasaki Ki-10 biplane, Nakajima submitted the Ki-27. This was originally a private venture from its designers Hideo Itokawa and Yasushi Koyama, and the plane was of all-metal construction with fixed landing gear. The plane was also powered by the 650 horsepower Nakajima Ha-1A radial engine. With the prototype making its first flight on the 15th of October 1936, test evaluations conducted in 1937 showed that the Ki-27 had a lower top speed and lower climb rate compared to Mitsubishi's Ki-33 and Kawasaki's Ki-28 submissions, but it had the superior manoeuvrability and superior turn circle in particular, this in part being due to its very low wing loading. Therefore, the Ki-27 won the competition and the Imperial Japanese Army ordered 10 pre-production samples, designated Ki-27A or KO. These planes were for further testing, and were to embody enclosed cockpits and larger wings as tested on the second prototype. The planes were completed by December of 1937, and on the 28th of December that year, the plane entered service as the Army Type 97 fighter. Entering service with the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force's 59th Sentai on the 1st of July 1938, and expanding to other Sentai by the end of the year, the Ki-27 proved itself against the Curtiss Hawks of the Chinese Air Force during the course of the Second Sino-Japanese War, whereby it entered combat in the late summer of 1938 and provided air supremacy for the Japanese well into 1939. Additionally, in the border clashes between Japan and the Soviet Union, ranging from 1938 to 1939, the Ki-27 proved superior to the I-15 BIS biplane and an equal to the I-153 biplane. It was only the arrival of the I-16 monoplane that started to cause the balance to tip in the Soviets' favour. The plane you're seeing on screen today, the Ki-27B or Otsu, entered production in 1939, seeing the following refinements being standardised. The introduction of the 710 horsepower Nakajima Ha-1B radial engine, increasing the plane's maximum speed to 292 miles per hour or 470 kilometers an hour at an altitude of 11,500 feet, and the introduction of a completely glazed cockpit canopy. However, despite all the strengths of the Ki-27, it had some significant weaknesses, as found in the conflicts prior to Japan's entry into the Second World War, these being as follows. Poor firepower, as the plane was armed with only two 7.7mm Type 89 machine guns as mounted in the cockpit floor, firing from behind the engine, 500 rounds per gun, and a lack of armour protection, both on the fuselage and for the pilot, and the absence of self-sealing or fire-suppressed fuel tanks. These weaknesses were only compounded following Japan's entry into the Second World War in December of 1941, whereby in Burma in particular, the low top speed of the aircraft was to undermine its supremacy against the likes of the F-2A Buffalo, the P-40 Warhawks, and Hurricanes present. The Kate, as the plane was designated by the Allies, was to be phased out of combat service by the end of 1943, replaced by the Nakajima Ki-43. But up until that point, a total of 3,399 Ki-27s were produced, 1,492 of these being the Otsu subvariant. It is worth noting that on screen today you'll see two bulges underneath the inner sections of the wings of this plane. These are to represent the two 28.6 gallon fuel drop tanks that the Ki-27 could carry for longer range missions. Alternatively, the plane was able to take four 55-pound or 25kg bombs, which could be mounted in these positions instead of the drop tanks for ground attack roles. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the Ki-27 Otsu handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. Our first game of today takes place on the ground strike map Foggy Albion using the following setup. Stealth belts for our machine guns, reason being these are the most powerful belts available in my experience. Our gun convergence is set to 500 meters as our armament is based in the nose and therefore is not convergence reliant, a standard piece of setup for us. And finally for our fuel load, we are taking the normal 30-minute fuel load to ensure we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. To begin our analysis, this first gameplay is going to focus more on the strengths of the Ki-27 rather than its weaknesses, whereby from the start we can see that this plane has a wonderful climb rate. Not in the region of the utmost climb rates at your battle rating tier as held by the Heinkel 100D1, but close, and you can sustain your climb very easily, which means you can get up to the altitudes where the bombers are going to spawn in at early on and intercept them accordingly. As we make our way towards an enemy BR-20, we're going to challenge the perception that your two 7.7mm machine guns are not ideal for bringing down bombers. If you just seek to spray ammunition into an enemy bomber's fuselage in order to bring it down, then yes, they're not ideal because you're going to need to use a lot of rounds, although you do have a maximal ammo capacity in order to be able to take this approach. With a little bit of precision shooting, you can use these guns to bring down bombers faster than you may imagine. As we take out one of the gunners of the BR-20, and we snap around using our great turn circle to get onto their 6, get in close, finish off the rest of their gunners before aiming for the weak spots of the BR-20. And due to the very balanced nature of this plane, i.e. the Ki-27's ability to respond well to control input, we can focus on specific weak points, i.e. the engines, focusing here on the rightmost engine, and we break its oil tank open and cause oil to start splattering all over our cockpit screen, but it does look as though that BR-20's tail control and also its engines are starting to fail. So we decide to break off and leave them to potentially die later on. Now, having broken off, we're taking a reload at this point. And the thing with reloads, when you do jam your guns, or alternatively you just run out of ammunition, the reloads are painless, because you've got low caliber armament, which means your standard reload is 15 seconds, and with an expert crew, which isn't too hard to achieve, you'll be able to get your reload down very quickly, and that means really your guns will never stop firing. Now we're going to go after a TBD-1 here using the same approach as with the BR-20, and we'll see once again how the great turn circle of the Ki-27 allows us to come around very rapidly on the bomber as it goes away from us, and we can get nice and close to pick up the kill. Opening fire on their underside to begin with, and as we now come around we get right on the 6 of this TBD-1, and before their rear gunner can get any accurate shots on us we take out their pilot for our first kill. We're now going to look east and notice the Junkers 87 as we spot the BR-20 gradually going into the ground, and we're going to go after the Junkers 87. And here this begins to explain the manoeuvrability of the Ki-27 further, because, for those unaware, the Junkers 87 R2 dive bomber, which we're seeing here, is actually quite a manoeuvrable plane for its stature. And therefore it can be a bit of a problem for most monoplane fighters, especially when you first encounter one who knows how to use their manoeuvrability. But we're going to latch onto this Junkers 87 as they come out of their dive, and they're trying to head back up. And as soon as they try to split S for another dive to try and get away, we're right on the 6 at 0.1 of a kilometre, and we spray him, taking out their gunner first, and we pick up the kill on the BR-20 at this point, and that makes us think we've killed the Junkers 87, a mistake on my part. But we can see how we can correct our mistake very rapidly, get right back in on the 6 of that Junkers 87, and kill off their pilot for our third kill. But now that we're down to lower altitudes, let's talk about manoeuvrability in the midst of a turn fight, or indeed the furball. Well, the Ki-27 is phenomenal in this regard, and we'll see that straight away as we dodge the incoming fire from a MiG-315, snap rolling all around their screen and making it near impossible for them to hit us with their wide array of machine guns. And we latch onto their 6 and we knock out their tail control, which will give us our fourth kill. All your control surfaces work very well. Starting with your turn circle is incredibly tight, and I would personally wager it's the tightest turn circle of any monoplane fighter at the battle rating and tier, superior to the likes of the Ki-43, and we'll see that in the second game. However, against biplanes, you've got nothing to worry about, because if you employ your landing flaps, you'll be able to turn as tight as most of the biplanes, the only exceptions being the likes of the I-153 and the Ki-10. But even then, you can give them a good run for your money, because you have the control surfaces to back up your turn circle, as we snap right out the way of the incoming fire from the P-36A Hawk. Let's start with the weakest control surface, the roll rate or your ailerons. Now your roll rate is good, it's not ridiculously fast compared to that of say an I-15 biplane, but it's more than enough to allow you to change up direction on the fly. Meanwhile, your rudder, on the other end of the spectrum, your most powerful control surface, allows you to snap the directionality of the plane around to follow a foe, as we've been seeing against this P-36A Hawk, and it means that hammerhead turns on your rudder are incredibly quick. In the middle ground, as we set the P-36A Hawk on fire and hopefully cause them to burn to death, is your elevator, which is snappy, it's very responsive, and means that you can go into very tight loops, whether they be positive G or negative G, very quickly and therefore catch opponents by surprise. Again, even biplanes in some regard. Now of course there are some downsides to the concept of negative G, because one thing I did not point out in the historical overview is that the engine you have here is a carburettor engine, which means negative G manoeuvres will cause the engine to stop working. And to counteract that, all you need to do is pull out of the negative G and therefore engage the engine once again, and your engine will come back to life and you'll get all your performance as before. And we decided to break off of the BA65 there because we weren't getting too clean a shot. They were very evasive and were starting to take damage to our engine and to our fuselage, but more endurability in the second game. So what about at high speeds? What happens to the control surfaces? Well, in general, you don't have too much to worry about because it's not going to be a typicality that you're going to go to speeds in excess of 400 km an hour for the battle rating and tier. But if you do, your maximum dive speed is 723 km an hour, which is ample. It's more than enough to enable you to pursue most foes, although there will be the likes of the MiG-3 and the Heinkel 100 who will outrun you in this regard. And your dive speed acceleration is decent. It's not phenomenal, but you pick up more than enough speed to be able to pursue foes. And ideally you shouldn't be using a dive to get away from foes, you should be using your manoeuvrability. Although you will outdive biplanes, the foes that will be able to manoeuvre or outmanoeuvre you in the long haul. When you get to higher and higher speeds, as we pick up our third assist and now dodge out the way of the incoming fire of the I-15, we thought they were coming for us, one has to consider the fact that when you hit 450 km an hour, you'll start to lock up your roll rate, whereby your ailerons will lock up to a maximum of 650 km an hour and you will only retain 25% of your roll rate. The rudder, on the other hand, has a very significant lockup between 525 and 600 km an hour, whereby you'll lose 75% of its controllability, and your elevator isn't really affected at high speeds, whereby you'll lose 25% of your performance capability from 550 to 600 km an hour. Which means you can engage in some medium speed boom and zoom tactics if you're feeling confident. But turning against foes is where this plane is suited, as we pick apart the I-15 for our ace, and that means the game's about to come to its end. So let's go and take a look at some post-game stats. With our 5 kills and 3 assists, we picked up 8,205 silver lions and 2,154 research points. Thus far then, we focused in particular on the strengths of the Ki-27, of which there are 2 main ones. Firstly, the great climb rate, which is sustainable and enables you to gain a lot of altitude in this plane, either straight at the start of a match or over the time in the middle of a game. The second and more important one is the phenomenal manoeuvrability of this plane, whereby you have the turn circle and the control surface responsiveness to make you as manoeuvrable as even the most agile of biplanes. And if you engage your landing flaps, you'll be able to sustain turns like them, albeit for a limited period of time, due to the energy bleed of said flaps. The third strength that we didn't really talk about as such is the versatility of the Ki-27. We perhaps hinted at it, whereby whilst this is a purebred fighter, it can be used for bomber interception if needs be, and we saw that against the BR-20 at the start of the first game, whereby we're able to latch onto the 6 after knocking out their gunners and aim for their key weak spots. And with the control sensitivity of this aircraft, you can focus on those key weak spots and bring the bomber down rather rapidly, faster than just spraying ammunition into the fuselage and hoping something eventually breaks. Also on the versatility front, we've seen how this plane does have some boom and zoom potential, but it is moderated by its control surfaces beginning to lock up at 450 km an hour. So we can say that our ideal speed range is between 175 and 400 km an hour. And what will your stall speed being at 95 km an hour? Only roughly 10 km an hour higher than the average of biplanes. Stalling out in this aircraft is a pleasure, not a problem, whereby you can cause a lot of opponents to stall out in your wake, and your stall recovery is sensational, whereby you'll be back up and running faster than most can get out of the vertical drop. But with that, let's move on to our second game of today and begin to focus more on the Ki-27 weaknesses, and on top of that just some other general performance characteristics. Our second game of today takes place on the ground strike map Eastern Europe using the same setup as before. However, this time, as the game plays out in a rather identical fashion to the first one, we focus on the darker sides of the Ki-27. And from the start, the least important one is high altitude performance. Now for your battle rated and tier, you're very unlikely going to see any engagements proceed above 3,000 meters altitude unless you're pursuing a level bombing bomber. whereby the plane's gone up to high altitude and decided to take out the bases from a position of level bombing flight. Now these altitude regions could extend up to 4,000, 5,000 metres let's say, and fortunately for you, your engine performance is retained up to 5,000 metres, at which point you begin to notice a gradual drop off, and when you hit exactly 6,000 metres altitude, your engine performance decays rapidly. Now of course if you are to bump into a MiG-3, a Heinkel 100 or a Messerschmitt 109 up at these altitudes, they're going to outperform you significantly. Albeit you retain all of your manoeuvrability even up to 7,500 metres altitude, so you can still turn fire, but your effectiveness due to your lack of engine performance is what undermines you in this regard. But it's not a problem due to the average engagement altitude, meaning that your ideal altitude range for your battle rated tier is ground level to 3,500 metres. Now here we go into a 2 versus 2, we want to try and help out our friendly Messerschmitt 109 ML1, who's got an I-15R and a C-200 on their 6, and we start by pushing the C-200 down and forcing them to pursue us, having done some damage to their fuselage. But we can use our great manoeuvrability and our ability to hammerhead on the fly in order to avoid the incoming fire of the C-200 and rip apart the I-15, thereby clearing the 6 of our friendly Messerschmitt. And now as the C-200 proceeds to go into a loop, we can snap right onto their 6 and follow them to secure the kill as they stall out, whereby we're nowhere near stalling out at this point. Taking out their pilot for our second kill. Now you'll have noticed so far, and indeed you'll notice throughout the rest of this match, that we try to avoid taking fire wherever possible. And indeed when we're pursuing enemy bombers and attackers with rear facing turrets, if we start to take hits, we're very likely to break off. Now this is because your overall durability is rather poor. The metal fuselage can take some hits, not from 20mm plus caliber cannon, but from machine guns. But the problem is you're very likely to be set on fire. And what with the wing fuel tanks having no fire suppression or alternatively self-sealing nature, this means that the fires can be sustained and therefore cause you to burn to death rather rapidly. And what undermines this even further is the fact that this plane has its external drop tanks modelled in, something we talked about in the historical overview. And therefore it only takes 1 or 2 bullets to hit these external fuel tanks and you'll find that this plane will go up in smoke. Alternatively, when the smoke does dissipate, either fire goes out, you'll find that this plane has lost roughly half of its fuel capacity. Now that's not exactly a problem because the games you're going to be playing don't exactly last more than 10 minutes on average from my experience, but it's a real problem when the plane gets set on fire so easily. But you are to expect that because it is a Japanese aircraft, and Japanese aircraft historically were not ones for having the self-sealing fuel tanks or fire suppression in general, especially at the start of the Second World War. So it is something you have to live with. Although I personally do question why the external drop tanks have been modelled in game. Regardless, let's move on. And as we go towards this BR-20DR at this point, we open fire on them, we're trying to secure the kill by getting a pilot knockout, we do some damage to their fuselage, and that'll hopefully be enough for an assist. We carry our momentum through to the next BR-20DR, and we go for the head-to-head once again. This time, we set their right-hand wing on fire by the looks of things, and we pick up an assist, as we knock out their pilot as well. And as we now move forward, picking up the kill on the first BR-20 that we engaged, rather converse, seeing as we would have expected to have picked up the kill on the second one we engaged, what with the pilot knockout, we evade an incoming head-on from the TBD-1 Devastator, or we thought it was a head-on, but in the end it turns out they're just diving down towards the target. As we try to snap onto their 6, they're pulling a bit of distance, the gunner's being rather accurate, so we decide not to pursue. So that means you have to weigh up each engagement and try to understand which engagement am I going to have to go for, whereby I'm going to take the minimal amount of return fire. So with that TBD-1 we decided to break off because we were never going to close in to get the accurate shot to knock out their gunner or their pilot straight away. And when you go into the furball you have to continuously ask yourself, am I in a position where I'm going to get cut apart? And here we assist our teammates in bringing down the TBD-1, taking off their right hand wing, and then carry our momentum through to the Ki-44 from the distance that seems to be having quite a bit of fun with our friendly biplanes. As we break in here, we only break in to take some pot shots to try and pick up an assist, and then we head off towards the distance, waiting for the enemy team to come in and essentially construct a furball of our teammates, and now that we have our 4th assist, we're doing rather well. So outside of altitude performance and durability, are there any other weak points? Well, what if your engine being carburetor based rather than fuel injection, you do have to worry about negative G manoeuvres, but you can overcome this by replacing negative G dies with split S's, so it's not too much of a problem. But do keep in mind that when your engine does go off due to the negative G forces affecting the carburetors, you will need to put the throttle to maximum for a small period of time to re-engage your engine. And it's something you can forget about as we pick up our 5th kill and therefore our ace on the BA-65. and we go into the midst of a furball here. And what you'll notice throughout this engagement, I'm very hesitant to commit too heavily. And straight away we break off the CR-42 and out towards the fringe, because it appears as though the enemy team is gaining the advantage in the furball. And then it means there's more enemy planes and more likely someone is going to focus us. As the numbers begin to even up a little bit and we get ready to come back in, using the time away from the engagement to reload. Now of course you shouldn't hesitate to get stuck in with a Ki-27, because if you play your cards right you're going to have great fun. And we get stuck in here against a Ki-43, our successor, and we're going to demonstrate how we're the superior fighter in terms of manoeuvrability and turn circle, staying right in tight against the Ki-43, picking up a critical hit on their aileron control surfaces, and now we're just going to gradually whittle them down. And as they go further and further vertical, we disengage the landing flaps and we can just follow them, what with our stall speed being so wonderful and even lower than theirs. I believe, if I remember correctly, their stall speed is approximately 10 kilometers an hour higher than ours, although don't quote me on that, it's been a while. And that's our 6th kill. So I knocked out our competitor there, or our successor. We head out towards the fringe once again and assess the situation. So ideally, when handling your weaknesses, and as a result your playstyle, you just need to take a step back sometimes and try to understand what's coming my way, what do I have to think about in the middle of my engagement. Because with your two 7.7mm machine guns, you have to respect the fact that sometimes foes are not just going to go down in a burst. And we have seen a number of cases here where we've had to put in sustained fire, and other cases where we've got the kill straight away. It's in the first case, i.e. where you don't get the kill straight away, where you have to start thinking, how long do I want to be behind this foe before someone's going to cut me off and bring me down? So getting fixated on that one opponent can really undermine you in terms of your survivability. And it's a mistake I made too often when first flying this plane, trying to pick up the kills rather than trying to maintain survival and pick up the kills over time. But then again, it's a great training tool, i.e. knowing when to disengage versus when to stay on the foe and bring them down. So it's ideal for if you're going to pursue Japanese fighters further in being able to manage your dogfights accordingly and having that spatial awareness. As we go vertical here, watching the CR-32 potentially stalling out underneath us and just managing our position over our foes. And of course, what of your control surfaces experiencing lockup, starting at 450 km an hour, your boom and zoom characteristics are very limited. But with your maximum dive speed being that limited 723 km an hour, and your acceleration being reasonable in a dive, this isn't really a boom and zoom plane, and you don't have the firepower to conduct ample boom and zoom activities in the long haul. Though we can see here as we come down the Heinkel 51, some gradual boom and zoom strikes on foes that are going to be rather predictable in their flight path can work out as we pick up our 7th and final kill. As we aim towards this P-36A Hawk, can't get too clean a shot, and we have to break off. Especially as our control surfaces were locking up a little bit there after coming out of the dive. Although one thing you don't have to worry about is energy retention. You'll retain ample energy when conducting manoeuvres and coming out of dives in the Ki-27, and it can catch you by surprise how much energy you do retain. And sometimes you'll notice that I'm even having to compensate for having too much energy when coming out of manoeuvres. I'm expecting not to have as much, and therefore I'm having to snap around on the control surfaces a little bit more than what I'm perhaps used to in most other aircraft I've flown. But that's not a downside, it's just an adjustment, and that provides you with more flexibility when going into engagements as we go ahead to the Ki-43, but unfortunately the game ends and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our 7 kills and 4 assists, we picked up 14,795 Silver Lions and 1,892 research points. To defeat the Ki-27 Otsu in a given matchup then, I can recommend one of two approaches. The first, if you are flying a monoplane fighter, is to strike this plane with speed through head-ons and boom and zoom tactics, whereby even if you have equal firepower to the Ki-27, head-on passes are going to be ideal simply because getting caught up in a turn fight is going to lead to your demise. Alternatively, preying on the Ki-27 when it's in an engagement by striking and then swooping off into the distance and then coming around when you've pulled the distance will be ideal, because whilst the Ki-27 has an unreasonable top speed and decent acceleration, it's not a pursuer and it can only keep with its foes once it's caught them up in the turn fight to begin with. The alternative approach is if you're flying a biplane, and that is to duke it out in the turn fight, as you'll have roughly the same speed thresholds and you'll be able to perform with the Ki-27, and therefore it comes down to the pilot more than the plane as such. Although do feel free to plan your roll rate, as you'll typically have the superior roll rate and the slightly better stall speed, albeit only by roughly 10 km an hour, and that can make the difference. But by avoiding such circumstances today or being aware of them, we've hopefully demonstrated how the Ki-27 Otsu is a wonderful turn fighter, which at its low battle rate and low tier can make for a fantastic introduction to the world of turn fighting and indeed frustrating the aim of everyone around you. If anything, the Ki-27 Otsu feels like a plane from an aerobatic display, whereby it's able to just launch itself across the sky into a variety of manoeuvres without punishment, and it just keeps giving. No matter how hard you push on the control surfaces, the plane seems to revel in being pushed to the limit. Therefore, can I recommend Nimble, Nate? Definitely, and it's one plane that should not be missed. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.